Hey guys. Today we're going to go over preemptions to make your cases and your arguments better. So, like for all the other videos, we're just going to go over a little bit of theory. Then we're going to go explain how you would do this in the actual debate. And then finally, we'll give an example. So, what is a preemption? There are two big kinds of preemption. The first preemption is when you just explicitly rebut something. So you say, we expect the opposition team to say this. We think this is not true for these reasons. You launch this in the way that you might launch a rebuttal, where you would have multiple layers to your rebuttal. You would rebut different bits of the potential argument in the same way that you would rebut an actual argument. This can be potentially very powerful in the sense that you have a lot of dedicated time to say whatever you want about the other team, and they have to rebut it. They have to spend a lot of time rebutting it before they can actually argue their case. So while it's a high reward, however, it's also high risk in that you have to be 100% sure they're going to run it. If they don't run it, then it's just wasted time. It's not just that they run the same argument, but they have to run the same premises that you're rebutting. Otherwise, what you said won't help whatsoever because you rebutted something that doesn't come up. So this is something that you have to spend some time thinking about before you execute. And you have to do it in debates where you're sure that this specific argument in this specific way will come up. But if you do it correctly, it can be really difficult for the other team to overcome. In addition to this, you also have to be wary when you do this that you're not contradicting your own case. So when you rebut something, you may fall into the valley of too good to be true, where you rebut something really persuasively, but you unknowingly rebut something in your own case that makes it less realistic. An example of this would be in the World's 2021 final, where in the motion, this House supports an international court to prosecute health crimes. Government might be tempted to run many reasons why other countries will want to sign on to a court because they really, really don't want to have another pandemic in their own country. And they inadvertently make it easy for opposition to rebut them when opposition can just say, that's why you don't need an international court. You could just have bilateral courts between countries or bilateral agreements between countries because there's already an incentive for each and every country to have this buy in anyway. So you want to, when explicitly preempting something by rebutting it directly, do it in the way that you would a really well executed rebuttal. And when it's done persuasively, it can really crush another team's case. But when done poorly, it can make your own case weaker, and it can also just be useless if you do it poorly. The second way of preempting is to build your case preemptively around the idea of something. So we'll give an example of this later, but the basic idea behind it is to run premises that are resilient to rebuttal from the other team, whether it be by building multiple layers to shore up the defenses, or by maybe giving multiple bits of weighing that make it hard for it to rebut, like saying it's not just a case for vulnerable people, it's also a case that affects a lot of different people. So when you do this, you want to flag it explicitly, saying that this is not something that your opponent can rebut in this way anymore because we've said this. In addition, you want to build your case to be strong in multiple ways. So don't just stack different layers, but you want to add intermediary links between layers where you expect the case to be rebutted. So for example, in the motion like this house would implement a carbon tax, you might spend many reasons why companies, if they did have to charge a lot more, if they were charged a lot more for individual products, that they would slow down and they would get weaker because they would be less able to compete against other companies that were more carbon friendly or that were more environmentally friendly. At which point the opposition team could rebut your case in a different way by saying that this is a less important conclusion than the economy, which we want to really push forward. In this case, right, you don't just want to build your case to rebut or preemptively defeat one part, but you want to hedge against different kinds of rebuttal because obviously the other team can react to the way you've built your case and adapt around it. So it's much lower risk in the sense that you kind of always want to be building your case preemptively around the opposition case, and you always want to be flagging it explicitly. But again, it's worth thinking if you're overbuilding in one particular area and you're underbuilding in another particular area. So these are the main ways of preempting, which is one, explicitly rebutting something, and two, building your case around something. So how would you, in practice, think of preemptions in the debate? Well, during prep time, you would do three things. The first thing you would do is just really think deeply about what you're saying. Um, you want to approach it in the way that you would a devil's advocate, which is by asking if there are any major flaws in your argumentation or if there are any major areas in the debate that you're missing out on. Just as a regular human being with your intuition, have we decided to overfocus on something? Is this the main way that you could win the debate? Secondly, is you want to step into the shoes of the other team or the judge for a little bit. Preemptions are an exercise in self doubt, and the other team has much more motivation to doubt you than you do. So, what you would want to do is think about the best response that they could launch to you, and think about the best response you could launch to that response. If this response is something you can integrate into your case already, then do it. And then the better you get, the further down you can forecast, where after you launch that best response, they can launch another response to your response, and then you would do one for that one, and then you would do it as far down as you can until there's no responses left, and then you would try to keep every response that you would potentially launch in that chain within your argument also. So try to step into the shoes of what the other team or what the other judge might say to doubt you, and try and have that already be contained in your case so that closing doesn't get credit for it, or so that you're able to have a more robust case from the very beginning. The third and final thing is to think of real world examples, counter examples where this didn't work out. A common rebuttal launch nowadays is that if this is so good, why haven't we done it already? Or if this is so effective, then why did it fail in this case or in that case? While this is kind of a cheat way to do a rebuttal, I do think it relies on a fairly common intuition people hold, which is that the proposing team has a fairly large burden to change status quo. And so you would want to think of real world reasons that for why this didn't work out, but why the case that you're proposing is different. Maybe because you've learned from your lessons or because it's a different context. There are many ways that you could defend it, but what's important to point out is just what are some real world caveats that other teams might point out, so that you know how to defend against it already. Or in the worst case, you could just say, it didn't work out in that case for some exceptional reason, but we think it'll be different now. Okay, so now let's go into one worked example of the two different types of preemption. Let's use a motion that some of you might have seen before. This house supports the anthropomorphization of artificial intelligence. So you can Google what the word anthropomorphization means. It's basically just making it look and act more like a human. So the two ways we discussed, right, are explicit rebuttal and preemptive building. An explicit rebuttal you might run on government bench is to say, one likely argument from opposition is that if you make an AI more human-like, this would be immoral because you would put them typically in an undignified position of servitude, like a chatbot AI that can only chat with one person, or some sort of sewer cleaner in some undignified position. And when you give them the capacity to imitate humans and feel emotions, you only give them really the ability to feel sorrow and pain, which is torture, and that's an undignified position to be in. So in this case, this is untrue. We give three direct preemptions to this. First is, most obviously, just because they look human doesn't mean they are human. They could externally have like a face painted on top of it, but that doesn't mean that they feel real human emotions. Secondly, is that if they really were human, people would empathize with them in the same way that they do human workers, so they would treat them nicely. So we don't really have to worry all that much that they would feel pain or sorrow because they don't have pain receptors, and even if they did, people would be quite responsive to that in the same way that they are to other humans. But the third and final thing is that this is not a real concern. AIs, even if they're human-like, are very different in function and form from humans. You could just code the AI to love being servile and to love being helpful. The counterfactual for this is a human doing that same dangerous or humiliating job because these jobs are necessary to do. Someone needs to clean these sewers. And an AI is preferable because you can code it to not hate its life. You can code it so it doesn't have kids at home waiting for them to get back safely. But a human, you can't code these behaviors out. So that's one way of explicitly rebutting it. Now, one way of preemptively building your case around it might be to start with your characterization. So you could characterize anthropomorphization as the most likely type of anthropomorphization is not to make them genuinely sentient or feel human emotions, because we don't even know what this would look like. We don't have a good grasp yet of what makes an AI conscious or sentient. So it's not really possible to consciously code it into an AI. Furthermore, we also think that companies would not want to bear the legal or moral risk of making a legal entity that can feel and think. So that type of thing is very dangerous. And so the most likely characterization of anthropomorphization is the type that's very friendly, very warm, very trustable. The type that you would expect to be adopted in a helper robot for like an elderly home, or to care for the sickly, right? And these are the types of uses that we expect to be good and the type of uses we expect to unambiguously help the quality of life, especially in underserved areas. So at the level of base characterization, you're already sort of building against this likely argument coming from the other team by saying immorality is not really a serious concern in this debate by characterizing it out, giving some justification for why it's not possible. So this is an example of how to do preemption in debates. Preemption is a very, very powerful tactic. It gets more and more useful the better the rooms you are in get, um, especially as it gives opening teams more and more control and the ability to lock down even really high quality debates by always having at least one thing or two things get by the very end of it. Preemption is an important skill to master because it allows you to even build better closing cases as you're able to predict what comes out of opening. All of this is to say, one of the many skills that you should be learning as a growing debater is to figure out what it is that makes your opponents tick and how to defeat it before it even comes out. Thanks for listening.